Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. I'm your host, Wendy Covey. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, best practice, or challenge in marketing to technical audiences. Along the way, you'll meet friends and colleagues of mine who will share their stories. And my hope is that with each episode, you'll be inspired and ready to take action. Before we get started, I'd like to give a brief shout out to our sponsor, TREW Marketing. TREW is a full-service content marketing agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas. For more information, visit trewmarketing.com. As an industrial marketer, you're probably aware that there's been a pretty big shift happening in how engineers and technical buyers seek and consume information to make purchase decisions. And that shift is towards video and towards podcasting. But by the same token, many of you haven't yet created video content and definitely haven't started a podcast. And why is that? These media channels may seem a little bit intimidating, time consuming. So what I would like to do today is provide a no excuses episode with my friend Chris Luecke from Rockwell Automation. That is the host of the Manufacturing Happy Hour. And together we break down how this type of content is not only easier than you think to produce, but also a gold mine of repurposed content that you can use in so many different channels. So we also talk about beer because, of course, his happy hour is all about drinking. So be on the lookout for some suggestions of where to go to drink if you're in Austin, Texas, my hometown, and what kind of beer Chris likes. Should be a fun episode. Let's do this. Well, today I'm joined by Chris Luecke. By day, he's an account executive at Rockwell Automation, and by night, he's the podcast host of the Manufacturing Happy Hour. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Excited to be here. Thank you so much.
I realize we totally screwed up in the timing of this podcast because it's early in the day, and your show is all about happy hour, and I'm all about happy hour. So let's pretend for a moment that it was later in the day. What would you have in your hand?
Oh gosh, if it's let's say it's like, I don't know, 5 o'clock or so. Like I'm a beer guy first and foremost. My happy hour beer is probably going to be a pale ale or a good craft pilsner, something that's easy drinking, something that you can have a couple of without feeling too tired afterwards, and just gives you that afternoon weekend vibe. That's what I'd be looking for.
All right, I'm down with that. I like the blondes. Like the blonde beer, go figure.
Absolutely. Well, hey, blonde falls in that category too.
Yeah.
Very sessionable, a little more malty than some of the ones I just mentioned. So yeah, excellent choice as well.
Thank you. Either that or in Austin, if you've been here in my hometown, the Mexican martini is very popular here. So that's my go-to cocktail.
Ah, got it. Yes, it's been a while since I've been in Austin, but also an excellent beer scene down there. Good cocktails as well. I miss that town.
Well, come on back when you can.
Sounds good.
Well, for those of you listening and watching, let me tell you a little bit about Chris. He is no stranger to content marketing. He's hosted the Manufacturing Happy Hour for going on 4 years now?
Getting close to 4 years. First episode was October 2016, and the time has flown.
Wow. So I have lots of questions to ask you and advice to seek since I'm pretty new at this. So that'll be exciting for me personally. And I know that you use the show as a lead generator and also a resource for manufacturing leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What type of audience are you looking? When you have somebody in mind that you're speaking to for your show? Who is that ideal listener?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's something a lot of podcasters miss right out of the gate, and just because a lot of people when they're jumping into podcasts aren't really familiar with the medium right off the bat. But I think the best advice I could give is that have someone that, like, just a very specific individual that you're gearing a show to. And in my case at Manufacturing Happy Hour, I came up with what I call an avatar, like my ideal listener. And that avatar's name is Tim. And Tim is a 34-year-old operations manager at a mid-sized widget manufacturer in Los Angeles. He's got an engineering degree, and he's gone through his career as an engineer, and now he's in his first management role. He has a team that's reporting to him now, and he hears about all these technologies, and he needs to know how to apply them to his business, but there are a lot of buzzwords, and he has trouble really sorting through which ones are going to be the most effective. And at the same time, just mentioned he has a team. He's like, wow, how do I lead people? How do I take their careers into account? So he's looking for leadership advice. He's looking for technical advice. So at the end of the day, that is my ideal listener. So someone that's in a manufacturing role, in a leadership role in this industry, and looking for direction across a number of areas, whether that's tech, whether that's leadership, whether that's processes, supply chain. We cover that all in the show.
Excellent. We do the same thing. We call them personas, but
Yes.
exactly, exactly the same exercise. And I have two for this show. I
Oh.
have Sarah and Murray. And Sarah is an industrial marketer that's looking to move over to use a content marketing strategy, or maybe just improve their skills in content marketing. But
Mm.
Murray comes in too, and Murray is an engineer who's either a vice president of sales and marketing or an owner of a small business that's in the engineering space, and is curious how marketing has changed. Keeps hearing, don't just buy more ads. Don't just go to more trade shows. You need to be producing content. You need to have a good website. And
Yeah.
so those two are pretty important personas for us.
Absolutely. And it's good to know that I'm speaking to Sarah and Murray as we go through this, because now I can kind of cater my answers to best fit their experiences and what they're looking for.
Perfect. Well, let's talk a little bit about content marketing, just big
Mhm.
picture. What role does content marketing play at Rockwell Automation? And specifically, how does your show fit into that strategy?
Sure. I think I can best speak to where the show fits into that strategy. As marketing evolves, as content marketing evolves, companies are really starting to see the value in influencers and user generated content. So at the end of the day, the stuff I create on Manufacturing Happy Hour is stuff I create, but it's very much in line with the topics that Rockwell is trying to help out with, whether it's explicitly a Rockwell Automation executive or employee on the show talking about a Rockwell solution, or someone related to our industry that has great points to bring up in that space. So I think we're at the point where yes, individuals like seeing good marketing from companies, but as B2B, as we get to that point where people see it as a human to human marketing strategy, people want to see what the ambassadors of these companies are creating, whether that's, an enthusiastic employee or an enthusiastic customer that's using their stuff. So I think that's where Manufacturing Happy Hour really plays into a strategy like that, because it is one of those organic user generated pieces of content that in many ways can be more validating sometimes than something that the company itself would come up with. The reality is you need both in today's marketing environment.
Yeah, I like what you said about ambassador, and that, people used to think of that as only being the designated spokesperson for the company, right? Which would
Mhm.
be probably an executive or a senior fellow that's very technical. But in today's day and age, they want to hear from all sorts of different people within the company, as long as it's targeted to, relevant information. And
Yeah.
that's excellent. That's where you fit in all of this. And then look, you've created this forum that your official spokespeople from Rockwell
Mhm.
can come participate in, but they're not having to drive the whole thing.
Well, I think that gets into another really important topic that you just brought up, is that, if you're in a formal marketing, content marketing, social media role, a lot of that individual's job is just listening for what's out there. It's not necessarily having to come up with the content all the time. It's being on the lookout, keeping an ear on Twitter and on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And then when you see these type of people pop up that are, consistently sharing content, or maybe just sharing content on a one-off, it's like, wow, that really fits into our brand message. Let's try to find a way to amplify that.
So let's talk about, those of our listeners that are thinking about moving to this strategy.
Hmm.
And when I say this strategy, I'm specifically talking about video and podcasts and some of this community generating content, and community generated content, excuse me.
Hmm.
And so when I talk to these industrial marketers, there's a lot of hesitation So what obstacles do you commonly hear when people say, no, I can't do video, I can't do podcasts?
Yeah, I've talked about this on my show before. I've written blog posts on it. I mean, when it comes to anything, whether it's content marketing or just starting something new in general, you're always going to encounter excuses. In the case of content marketing, you mentioned video. I'll talk to that one specifically. A real common one is having the right equipment. I'm using air quotes for anyone that's not watching the video podcast and just listening to the audio. But, the reality is this smartphone is really all you need to get started. Like, the microphone's pretty good. You just need to go to a quiet enough space where you can get a video done. And if you have a message to share, you can do that on your phone. You can upload it straight to a LinkedIn or something like that. And it's as easy as that. But a lot of people, maybe I'll backstep that a little bit. Some people, if they're looking for excuses, can say, oh, well, I really need to get the right camera first. Or, another excuse you hear, it's like, oh, I don't like how I look on camera. I'm nervous about being on camera.
No
And
one likes how they look on camera. That's just, forget about it.
that's fair. But what I tell people in return to that, especially as someone that's in sales, if I'm talking to one of my sales peers, I say, you know what? That camera in front of you is the easiest customer you're ever going to talk to. It's just going to sit there. Exactly. They're not going to tell you your price is too high. They're not going to tell you your quality's crap. They're not going to tell you they can get something better from a competitor. It's just going to sit there and listen. So I try to frame it up that way because, I mean, at the salespeople are used to being in front of people and they're used to talking and they're used to listening. So if I can frame it up that way, that's often the way I've gotten people over that hurdle to dive into jumping on camera for the first time.
Yeah, that's great. And as someone who is relatively new at it, and I'll admit it, it was not only figuring out the right equipment, but it was also just, do I need to memorize things? Do I have a script? Oh, I sound really stilted, and it was perhaps an acceptance that, okay, early on, I'm just going to sound not my greatest, not my most genuine. And then as you go, each episode, you get better, you get more comfortable, you stop worrying about things so much, and it just flows. But it does take time and experience. And so you can't start that process until you start.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is, it's been a while since I've listened to some of my very first episodes. I'd probably cringe a little bit if I did that, but that's with anything. Like, no one is an expert when they get started, but starting and getting that experience, it just starts flowing. And then after a few episodes, you get some confidence under your belt, you get some experience, and it gets easier at that point. I think consistency is the big thing that is one of the hardest things to adopt because, sometimes people get that first video out there, like, whew, boy, that was nerve wracking. Now it's there. And then all of a sudden they move on to something else. And, video number 2 or podcast number 2 never comes out. And if you can get in that habit of getting that initial flow of content, then it starts you get momentum at that point is what happens.
You're cracking me up that you haven't gone back to listen to your early ones. I haven't either, but I need to. I will. Not ready yet.
It definitely felt a little more stiff from what I remember. I was trying to make sure I nailed all the lines and things like that. It was more scripted, but yeah, it's I needed to start there though. There was no way I was going to get to where I am today had I not taken those first uncomfortable steps.
Right. Well, is there ever a time where you would not suggest that someone try out video and podcasting for their company?
Wow. I'm trying. So my gut answer is no, because I really think, there's an opportunity to create that human element to any business. I want to think about it a bit more though. What I would say is if someone is creating content, make sure there's an action behind it. That's there's a difference between creating content or posting on social media just for the sake of it, to be like, yes, we have a pulse, we have a heartbeat. There's what I would recommend is have a call to action. I think that was when I was first getting started on my videos, my kind of 3-step process was say, hey, jump into the video, tell someone exactly what they're going to get out of the video. Say, this video is about X, or today you're going to learn X. Then give them 3 things at most, like, what's the challenge, why it's important, and maybe a story behind it. And then say, hey, this is the action I want you to take afterwards. at the end of it, whether that's visiting a website, whether that's signing up for a webinar, whether that's subscribing to a newsletter, tons of different relevant actions. I think it's what I would say is for content marketers, B2B companies, they need to think, what are the things that we ultimately need to get our prospects and potential customers to do that would get them into our funnel, get them into our system, and what are the things that would provide value back to them? You can't just ask them to sign up for a newsletter if there's no incentive. There needs to be something that would get someone to want to visit your website and stay on your website to explore a solution that they could get from working with you.
Yeah, and a strong call to action. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
that applies to every piece of content that you produce, right? That it's an important consideration. What you said about posting on social just to show you have a pulse. Boy, one of my pet peeves is companies that take their, college daughter or son
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
have them be the social media intern because, hey, they know social media and all the posts are really fluffy. There's no substance, there's no call to action, there's nothing that helps to reinforce a message or a brand. And so I know that's a little bit off topic for today, but the point is to make sure that you have a strategy behind all of your content and what you're doing and a call to action as well.
I think that's super in line with what we're talking about. The other pitfall I see that I'd add to that is I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make is when they post to social media and then don't engage in the conversation afterwards. Like the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing that someone can do is get on there and then not respond to a potential customer or prospect that's engaging on there. I think where one of the biggest things that companies need to know about social media is it's a two-way conversation. It's more about responding to what's out there than putting something out there, in my opinion.
Yeah. So talking about social media makes me think about content repurposing, because social media is such a great place to provide repurposed content out into the world. So
Mm-hmm.
backing up into video and podcast, tell me about ways that you repurpose on your show. Like, what is the original piece of content, and then how do you repackage that as you go into your promotional channels?
Yeah, great question. And one of the things that I talk about, particularly in terms of podcasting is a gold mine for repurposed content. Like, for example, today, you and I are doing a video podcast here on Zoom, and there's also going to be an audio podcast associated with this. And then there's so many ways to chop that up into little pieces of content that can be shared on social media afterwards. So, in addition to the long form pieces of content that I just mentioned, like you can take quote images that you can post on Instagram or LinkedIn. You can take little segments of our conversation and, make a 1, 2, 3 minute video on that and share that to social media as well. You could even write a blog post from it. If if you look back on an episode, I've done this before where I recently had a B2C marketer in the beer industry, kind of appropriate, but given the happy hour theme of my show. But the whole idea behind that was taking B2B to C marketing strategies and seeing how those could apply to the B2B world. And afterwards, I tallied it up. We had at least like 5 or 6 different pieces of advice that B2B marketers could use. I'm like, well, I should just write a blog post associated with that called 5 strategies that B2B marketers can borrow from the B2C world. So you get a blog post all of it out of a sudden. And that I could turn into a short video also where I just summarize that. You can keep going deeper and deeper when you get that initial piece of long form content, and you can really extend the reach of a creation like this, because the reality is only a certain number of people will listen to my podcast, will listen to this podcast in full form. But if you consistently post that over time to social media, you're going to reach a lot more people that, as a result, might go listen to the full episode at that point that hadn't known about it before. So it's a great cycle to get into, to realize that there's so much that can be used from one initial big piece of content.
Yeah, I had Albin Brook on recently from Buzzsprout, and he was sharing statistics about the number of people that view his short form podcast interviews on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and the number of people that read the blog post, and the number of people that actually listen to the full podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
as you might imagine, the longer the piece is, the fewer people pay attention,
Sure.
beginning to end, but the most qualified and the most engaged people are the ones that went to that long form. And so I
Yes.
think it just goes to show what you're saying is these short form pieces are ways to get awareness, grab attention, pull people in, and
Hmm.
eventually get them through. It's almost like a mini funnel, right?
Oh,
Where
it
you're
one
furthering to qualify people.
De- definitely. I completely agree with that because the reality is you want people listening to the long form content at the end of the day. That's where if someone is going to give, you 45 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever the length of the podcast is, that amount of their time, they're probably interested in what you have to say and maybe what you have to offer as a company as well. So that's where those short forms, like you just said, those short forms of content are really valuable because they can direct traffic back to that long form piece of content that really helps not only get people into your funnel, but it builds a relationship. That's where you have a better chance of converting someone when you have, because when you listen to a podcast for 25 minutes, you kind of feel like you know the person a little bit more, certainly more so than you would from a 3-minute video.
Yeah, and look, I know what kind of beer to buy you when you come to Austin. So perfect.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I'll tell you my favorite beer bar in the world at the end of this interview. It happens to be on Rainy Street in Austin, so
Okay.
it
Oh,
is a good
deal.
spot. Don't let me forget at the end.
I will not. Well, speaking of then repurposing and all these different things you can do with this content, how do you measure success? Is it number of pieces, number of eyeballs, leads?
I would say it's all of it at this
Okay.
point. It's great the way what I'll start with as an answer to this question is I think a lot of people get caught up in likes and things like that and the reactions, and that's good engagement. Particularly on a platform on LinkedIn where people start seeing, it's like, oh, so and so in your network like this post. It gets some more eyeballs on it, but I kind of say that those are a vanity metric in
For
some
sure.
way.
Yeah.
The biggest metrics I'm looking at are conversions and leads that I get out of this, things that turn into an actual relationship. And then obviously sales and opportunities that would come from those. I would say the biggest thing, and this goes back to one of the things we were just talking about, is I look at the podcast listen numbers as well, because, 2,000 views on a video on LinkedIn is good, but, seeing my numbers on my podcast rise from 300 listeners per episode to 500 listeners per episode, that's where I know it's like, all right, people are getting more engaged, because it's easy to scroll past that video on LinkedIn, but it takes a little more effort to jump in, subscribe to the show, and then spend some time listening to what's there.
It
So
sure
I would
does.
say podcast listenership and leads, conversions, and relationships that come from those. Those are the big two that I'm looking at.
Great. And when you first started, if you recall, your podcast, how long did it take to see a rise in subscribers and listeners? Was it a steady thing, or did you have some big jumps that you can attribute to certain guests or circumstances?
It's both. I think one of the things that I've talked about with a couple people, my business coach mentions this all the time. He's also a podcaster, is that podcasting is one of those mediums that you really can't hack in a lot of ways. Like, it's not like it doesn't necessarily have the same virality that a certain YouTube video might have, where all of a sudden you have tens of, thousands of views on a particular video. Podcasting is more of a gradual rise. But I will say certain topics do get more downloads. When I do a cybersecurity episode, I mean, it's like double the amount of listeners. I mean,
Wow.
it's great. And that's a signal to me. And that goes back to the idea of listening on social media and being like a social listener. When I see that, it's like, oh, well, I should probably keep doing more episodes on cybersecurity here and there. If that's something people like to hear and it's, backed up by the metrics, let's keep adding that to the mix. It's all about, because I think one of the best things about starting a podcast or video series and then sticking with it is, after a while, you don't need to think of everything. Your audience will start telling you, this is what we want to hear more of. So I think I kind of went off track a little bit with that, but it is very much, it can be topic based, and I typically see a gradual rise when I've done my shows before in terms of listenership.
You didn't go off topic at all. I found that very enlightening. Listen for the trends, see what people are gravitating towards, and create more of that. And I'm in let's see, I believe this is episode 26. So I'm new. I just started, earlier this year. And so far, my most popular episode has been on videos. And so that's part of why I wanted to make sure that was part of our conversation, since you have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's just a lot of interest in these newer areas of packaging content and a lot of hesitation as well. So hopefully this one will just take off.
Fingers crossed. That you've led an excellent interview. It's been awesome being here.
Thank you very much. Well, what advice do you have for new podcasters like me? Are there any other mistakes that I'm making or others tend to make that you could help us avoid?
Wow. So I mean,
I can take it. I have thick skin.
no, well, no, you're doing great. You come prepared. Before the interview, you mentioned you'd listened to some of my other podcasts. I think, in fact, I'll expound upon this because I think this is one of the biggest things. It's taking interviewing seriously, because I think some people look at it as just like a throwaway skill that everyone is just supposed to have in a lot of ways. But putting together a good interview takes some work. You want to, if you can, read some blog articles your guest has written, or listen to some podcasts that your guest has been on, all the things that you've done really well in leading up to this interview. I think a lot of people skip that because they think it's like, oh, well, I'm going to ask these kind of check the box questions. And the reality is that I've learned this from interviewing. I do another podcast that's more about drinking with, punk bands and other cool people around the world called Pubcast Worldwide. But I picked it up from interviews with some of the musicians. They're like, so many people come in and ask us questions that they could just look up on the internet. Where you get into the power of podcasting and video is all of a sudden you have a way to ask someone, why do you do what you do, and really get into the depth of that person's character in a way that you can't when you just search for something on the internet. So preparation and taking the skill of interviewing seriously. There are a lot of good resources out there that can teach you how to be a good interviewer. Look at guys like Larry King, and I'll say Howard Stern as well, that have made careers out of, just being superb listeners, superb interviewers, just the way they ask questions differently than other people. It's an art unto itself. But the other piece of that, because I don't want that to come off as intimidating, like, yes, interviewing is a skill. You'll get better at it as you go. But the other piece of that, I'm going to go on the flip side, is just do it. Like, I know I'm stealing the Nike slogan, but, don't make excuses. Don't waste time. Like I said earlier, you have what you need on your smartphone to create your first piece of content. And once you get that first one out there, once you get that second one out there, you get that momentum, you get that confidence, and it starts becoming easier and easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too, it comes back to that avatar, that persona, and we discussed ours. And so for my show, right, I lead a content marketing agency. And so I want to bring on guests that I can learn from. And so I'm coming from a place of, it's very authentic when I'm asking things. It's like, wait, I need to remember to ask Chris this thing, because it'll help my agency provide better counsel to our clients. So anyway, I'm having a lot of fun with it so far. So.
Likewise, I do the same thing when I interview too. Sometimes I need to check myself really quick. It's like, wait a second, I have an opportunity to talk to this person. I need to make sure I ask the things that I really want to know that I don't know yet. So another great piece of advice right there.
Good. Well, where can our listeners and watchers connect with you, learn more about manufacturing happy hour, that sort of thing?
The easiest spot would be manufacturinghappyhour.com. That's where you can get access to all the episodes. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, whatever your podcast player of choice. So manufacturinghappyhour.com is the easiest spot to find us.
Great. And one of my favorite episodes, because it was geared so much towards content marketers, was one you did in late 2019 on social media. So in particular, I'm going to put a link to that in our resources page on the podcast blog post that I'm writing as repurposed content from this.
Love it.
And we'll have those links as well as a link to your LinkedIn.
Excellent. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Great interview. I really enjoyed the conversation today.
Good. Well, when I go to Rainy Street with my mask on, of course,
yes.
Where do I go to have great beer?
Craft Pride. It's an all Texas craft beer spot. So it's got like 60 taps. They're all from the state of Texas. I think I love the hyper local aspect about beer. And I think it's the perfect Austin bar. It's a little off. It's a little further away from the noise of 6th Street. If anyone knows Austin, 6th Street is kind of the main drag there. Rainey is, a couple blocks off. It's just a real chill patio, real good beers, great spot to enjoy some of those Pilsners, Blondes, and IPAs we were talking about earlier in the Texas heat. So
love it. Can't wait to go check it out.
Definitely. And my last trick I will throw out there, I always put a beer recommendation at the bottom of my newsletters, or I put the bars that come up in the conversation at the bottom of my show notes page to get people to scroll all the way down through everything. So just another fun way to get people to see everything and take the right action.
Okay, I'll give it a plug. I'll add it.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I enjoyed having you on the show today.
Thanks so much.
Visit contentmarketingengineer.com for notes and resources from today's episode. While there, you can subscribe to my blog, which will keep you up to date on new episodes and other resources for building trust and growing your business with technical content. Thanks and have a great day.